Did you know that a surprising number of objects you use every day are thanks to accidents? Let me show you what I mean. On this episode, we discover how a drooling dog got us addicted to our phones.
Ooh, Greg's lunch looks good.
Find out how a damaged delivery led to America becoming a superpower.
What looked like a disaster now has turned into an opportunity.
And learn how a mysterious disappearing gas led to, well, pretty much everything else.
And he says, oh, that's interesting.
Oops, I changed the world. Today, almost 70% of American households have pets. And the most popular is the dog. With over 63 million homes having at least one. So, I can't be alone in wondering, does your pet seem to have strange psychic powers?
So I was opening a can of dog food the other day, and as soon as I touched that can to the opener, is it reading my mind?
Stranger still, pets manage to mysteriously disappear whenever you try to take them to the vets. No, they're not telepathic. They're reacting to a fascinating impulse first discovered in 1890 by a Russian scientist called Ivan Pavlov.
Russia in the 1890s is ruled by the Tsar, and if you're rich, if you're a prince or a duke, it's absolutely marvelous. You're leading a sumptuous lifestyle. But for 99% of Russians, either on the land or in the factories, it's really pretty miserable.
During the 1890s in Russia, there was famine, lots of political tensions.
It's a dictatorship, there's a secret police, and you're itching for a revolution.
It was in this world that Pavlov was starting to make his mark.
Ivan Pavlov is working in a physiology department studying digestion.
Saliva is basically step one in your digestive system. When you put that tasty food into your mouth, your saliva basically gets to work because it contains something called amylase, a digestive enzyme which breaks starches down into sugar.
It's why you salivate when you smell a delicious pizza.
Which is why Pavlov decides to focus his research on digestion on saliva, specifically dog saliva.
He puts a vial next to their mouths and puts a bit of food in front of them. When the dog starts to salivate, he takes a bit of their drool, puts it in the vial, and documents it.
Pavlov's work isn't exactly glamorous, but it's all worth it when he stumbles across something remarkable.
He notices that the dogs are salivating before the food is ever in their presence.
And he starts to wonder, why are the dogs drooling if they don't see the food? Maybe they already know what time the food's going to come, so they're anticipating it.
He realizes something weird is going on here. It's the oops moment for Pavlov.
So it got him thinking, and it got him experimenting.
Еще неизвестно, насколько они долговечны и прочны. Об этом нам расскажет.
First, he exposes the dogs to a buzzer, and they hear the buzzer, and of course, they don't salivate. Then he gives them some food. Well, of course they salivate. Then he gives them the buzzer and the food together. And he keeps doing this and doing this. Eventually, he takes away the food, and he just exposes them to the buzzer. At that point, the buzzer alone is enough to cause the dogs to copiously salivate. And it's not a decision the dogs are making. It happens. Their salivary glands just pump out saliva when they hear the buzzer. It's automatic. Now, aha! Buzzers, you may be saying.
That's right, buzzer. While people usually talk about Pavlov using bells, he never did. He needed to precisely measure the duration of a stimulus, so he used buzzers and metronomes, but never bells. Clearly, if he had used bells, he'd have never ended up winning the Nobel Prize.
What's happened is that the dogs have learned to associate the sound of that buzzer with getting food.
What he found is that he could get salivation to happen in the presence of any old stimulus, and it was the foundation of what he called classical conditioning.
Watching dogs drool, Pavlov has uncovered the cogs, motors and motivation of a powerful subconscious mechanism hidden inside the animal brain.
Now, Pavlov has, well, unfortunately, a bit of a dark side. And one of the things he did was he tried to get conditional responses in dogs where they were absolutely terrified of something.
He would do things like push dogs downstairs to see if they could associate stairs with an immediate fear response.
If you're thinking, I can't believe they gave this dog bother a Nobel Prize, then I've got some bad news for you. It gets worse.
Now you're really going to hate Pavlov, because not only does he experiment on cats and dogs, he also goes to the local orphanage to find some candidates for experiments.
There were no ethical committees back then on these things, and he would feed food like sweets or bad-tasting sweets to orphans to get these physiological responses.
So all of this activity by Pavlov and his successors may seem incredibly cruel, but let's remember that it did shine a light on the inner workings of the animal and the human brain.
Since then, scientists have built on Pavlov's research to teach humans how to overcome their phobias, pigs how to play video games.
The final level of this game is much harder.
Dogs to detect diseases, bees to play football, elephants to sniff out landmines, and pigeons to fly American missiles.
During World War II, pigeons were used in a training technique where they would put their beak against a screen to tap for targets.
And the idea is that that would actually be able to shift the way that the missile went. This is before computers. This is like pigeon computer. It didn't actually come to fruition, but it was the start of a whole field of research.
Pavlov's accidental discovery shines a light not just on animal behavior, but also on the unexplored mechanics of the human brain. He found that the same basic system of expectation and reward that rules animals rules us too.
Are you my kind of guy? My kind of guy drinks Valentine ale. It's brewed with a little more courage for a taste you can feel.
This revelation was soon seized upon by wily companies, intent on using it to make us spend.
Yes, for smoking that you're bound to like, you just can't beat a lucky strike.
Since the 1930s, Coca-Cola has launched advertising campaigns around the Christmas period.
We all get that happy, jolly feeling when we see the fat man in the red suit. So Coca-Cola cemented in our minds effectively that this fat, jolly man should be associated with the lovely feelings that, oh, perhaps you could get from something like a Coca-Cola.
It's the feeling of Christmas, the feeling of happiness, and because of that, it's why people want to buy Coca-Cola all year round.
And so associating that with your product from a company point of view was a no-brainer.
But you don't need to be a Mad Men-style advertising executive to use these tricks to manipulate people. These warm associations can be used by any of us. You just need to know the triggers.
Having just sold my parents' house, I can tell you that either baking bread or making lots of coffee makes prospective buyers just that little more inclined to say, yes, I'll take it.
How can any creature that can make a space rocket or even a wristwatch still be so primitive, so easy to manipulate?
When we think of American adverts, you think of the pin-up women and how they market cars. They'd always have this beautiful woman who was there to draw the attention of the male viewers and to associate it with the car.
That association of sex and cars is all about creating an unstoppable desire to own that product.
Of course, it isn't just selling products that Pavlov's discoveries transformed. Classical conditioning's been harnessed by social media very effectively.
More recent research has even shown that we get literally a rush of endorphins when we hear the ping that tells us that our social media post has been liked. It's almost like the social media companies have taken a page from Pavlov and are intentionally conditioning our responses.
That little rush we get is enough to train the reward centers in our brains.
There's all these associations that we subconsciously have, and that's all a part of behavioral psychology.
But it's not all bad news. This understanding of what makes us tick has also enabled people to live better, more manageable lives.
People with anxiety will be thanking Pavlov because the whole science of cognitive behavioral therapy is about unlearning those responses that people with anxiety often have, where they have a response that really doesn't fit what's going on in the outside world. So it's through Pavlov that we're able to get people to unlearn those essentially irrational responses.
So there you have it. Whether it's instinctively reaching for your cell phone when you hear a beep.
Wait a minute. I gotta get this.
Ooh, Greg's lunch looks good. That's making me drool.
Curing our anxieties or making us feel unnecessary feelings for products, we can thank Pavlov and his accidental discovery for enabling us to understand the inner workings of our brains. Still to come, an accident in a munitions lab that has explosive consequences.
I'd have been absolutely terrified.
And we find out how a Hollywood A-lister accidentally invents the modern world.
This is about serendipity.
But first, a quick question. What links your fridge?
The world's tallest bridge.
And this.
The answer is Teflon, an accidental invention with a world-changing impact. But first, to set the scene.
When a world that had plodded down the centuries suddenly found out how to use a force that had waited to go to work since before the daybreak of history.
By the mid-1920s, 60% of American homes have electricity. For the middle classes, this heralds the dawn of the electrical appliance, full of promise to make housework easier. First came the vacuum cleaner, and then the washing machine,
So maybe my tie's caught in the ringer.
and then the big one.
In 1927, General Electric actually launches the first domestic refrigerator. But the thing is, it costs $7,000 in today's money. I love cold food as much as the next person, but not that much.
Enter Roy Plunkett, a poor farm boy from Ohio who has dreams of becoming a scientist.
So Roy graduates from college in the Great Depression and he goes home to his parents' farm. This is a time when America is on its knees. He's dying to study chemistry, but it seems impossible.
His dad says, I don't have 2 pennies to rub together, but there's this guy down the road who owes me 15 bucks. Now in those days, that was a lot of money. And so he says to Roy, if you can go talk him out of it, you can keep it.
So Roy wanders off to go and see this guy and somehow manages to wheedle the $15 out of him. And that's enough to get him to a higher university to go and study for a PhD.
While Roy's away studying, the price drops for domestic refrigerators, and they're suddenly within the grasp of the average American household.
The refrigerator in the kitchen is a kind of cooling device. A basic principle of refrigeration is that cold is the absence of heat.
Refrigerators become a little bit more accessible, but they use a lot of chemicals and refrigerants that are actually quite toxic. So it's kind of a health hazard.
Those cooling coils are filled with gases, including ammonia and ether.
As the liquid boils inside the tubing, it removes heat from the refrigerator.
Which works well until there's a leak.
So there's only one little problem with the early fridges, and that is that they could be completely deadly.
When a leaky fridge kills a whole family as they sleep, some of the biggest brains in the world focus on finding a safe way to keep food cool.
Incredibly, one of the people who gets onto the case is none other than Albert Einstein, and he's fresh from getting a Nobel Prize for the theory of relativity. Now he turns that great planet-sized brain of his to fridges.
Einstein develops his own fridge that didn't have really any moving parts and actually used a heat source.
There's his name on the patent. But while it's understandably clever, it wasn't without its own issues.
He managed to invent a fridge that was inefficient, noisy, and never really took off.
Actually, Tony, because there are no moving parts to go wrong, Einstein's fridge is still used inside nuclear reactors today. But you're right, it was never a domestic success. At this point, Roy Plunkett gains his PhD and starts to look for a job.
Perhaps you've considered the idea of working for a chemical company.
That's great advice, and Roy takes it, joining one of the giants of the chemical industry. His new job is to find a way of making fridges both safer and cheaper.
Around this time, a rival company ended up developing a new type of refrigerant that was actually safer to use. So in response, Roy started working with a similar compound known as tetrafluoroethylene.
Tetrafluoro... No, that's not it. Tetrafluoroethylene?
This is mercifully shortened to TFE, and he's creating a lot of that gas to experiment with to find that safe refrigerant.
Roy stores his gas in iron cylinders where it's frozen and compressed.
The next morning he turns up at the lab, he opens a cylinder, and nothing comes out. Zilch. Rien. He keeps turning, the tap comes off, and there's nothing coming out of the cylinders.
A normal human, like me, would say, well, I must have screwed up. I'll have to do it all over again. Somehow I must have let this gas escape. But Roy is really sharp, and he says, let me weigh the whole thing first in case somehow the gas is still there. Like, he's really thinking outside of the box. And it turns out when he weighs it, it weighs the same as it would if it were full of gas.
Roy decides to cut one of the cylinders open.
And what he finds inside is amazing.
In the cylinder is a strange white powder.
The gas has polymerized into this powdery white solid. And he says, oh, that's interesting.
The combination of the iron and the cold has caused the gas to form a polymer.
The iron walls of the container acted as a catalyst to allow the gas to link together with itself, essentially. And this was not thought to be possible, but here it was.
Several of the smaller molecules are combining to form larger molecules. The result is a material of the same chemical composition, but with entirely different physical properties.
Those properties depend on what molecules are bonded and how long those bonds are. Some polymers bend and bounce like rubber, others are see-through like glass. The powder that Roy's discovered appears to do nothing at all.
So it's this kind of strange, sort of slippery substance. Turns out that it's more inert than sand. It won't really react with other things. It won't react with acid.
It therefore might be totally useless, or perhaps the opposite.
You may think that a slippery substance that doesn't react isn't very exciting, but you'd be wrong.
He realized that it had kind of anti-superpowers, if you will. It didn't react with anything.
All the magical non-stick properties of Plunkett's new material come from its molecular structure.
So Roy has just accidentally invented polytetrafluoroethylene. So we've gone from TFE to PTFE.
It's this long chain of carbon, but it's surrounded by fluorine atoms. And they're interacting so strongly with that carbon backbone that they don't want to interact with anything else. So they make this big, long caterpillar, but it's like the caterpillar's wearing armor. Nothing can get to it, and it won't stick to anything else.
So whether you bake or broil or stew, the Frigidaire kitchen does it all for you.
Roy's invention of PTFE never did help with fridges. But DuPont wonder, can this substance that doesn't react with anything be put to some useful purpose? Plunkett's material, which they trademark as Teflon, becomes the go-to non-stick coating for machined metal parts in industrial processes. But DuPont are reluctant to sell their product to the public until they're absolutely sure it's safe in untrained hands. But while they hesitate, others aren't quite so cautious.
So now we go to La Belle France. There is an engineer over there called Marc Gregoire.
Mark's day job is in an aerospace research lab, which is how he manages to get his hands on some Teflon.
Mark puts it on his fishing tackle so the line won't bind. And his wife says to him one day, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, it doesn't stick to anything." And she says, "Well, how about doing something useful with that, like putting it on my pots and pans?"
Mark figures out that if you actually etch the aluminum with acid, it develops these pores, these kind of grooves, where you then are able to fill in that area with the Teflon powder at the right temperature. This is what then can produce the right surface for the frying pan.
The pans are wildly popular in France, but American retailers are yet to be convinced. In fact, nobody wants to sell the pans at all until Macy's decides to take a punt.
Macy's takes 200 of these nonstick pans and sells all of them in just 2 days. And that's during a snowstorm. I don't even go out when it rains. So people are battling through the weather just to get these nonstick pans. That's the real moment of change when people buy into this product.
Cookies won't stick to Teflon. Even oatmeal won't stick to Teflon. I don't think anything sticks to Teflon.
Since then, more than 1 billion pans have been sold worldwide, revolutionizing cooking as we know it. And I know I've contributed at least 3 or 4 to that number.
And outside of the kitchen, Teflon has continued to fuel innovation in some unexpected ways. This is the Millau Viaduct, the tallest road bridge in the world. Built in 2004, this 8,000-foot-long megastructure is taller than the Eiffel Tower and considered one of engineering's greatest achievements.
This viaduct is so tall that you can literally drive above the clouds.
So why was Teflon important here? Well, there were no cranes big enough to help build this bridge by taking one section and bringing it out to the end of the other. These big, heavy pieces of road that had to be slotted in place would just have too much friction if you were to push them without something slick in between. But the use of the Teflon wedges and a hydraulic pump behind them meant that they could just be moved right along and slotted into place.
So, an invention from a company whose name is French for bridge played a crucial part in building this French bridge. Impressive.
A journey that previously took 3 hours now only takes 10 minutes. So imagine the impact that's had on families and businesses.
In fact, Plunkett's accidental discovery has been so successful that there's almost no aspect of our lives untouched by it.
Carpet,
cars,
furniture,
clothing,
light bulb,
paint,
windshield wipers,
cables, artificial limbs,
nail polish.
Wow, Teflon.
Yep, and your dentures too. It's everywhere on this planet. And also, everywhere we've been off it too.
It's been used in outer space.
4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
It's particularly useful in the Mars rover because the material can undergo extreme changes in temperature without reacting.
Mars has these huge sandstorms going on. The Mars rovers are mainly powered by solar panels. If they're covered in sand, the rover can die. And so, if you have Teflon, that actually can protect the rover from getting piled with sand and extend the rover's life.
strong, lightweight, and long-lasting, it must have a sticking point somewhere.
So if you're thinking that maybe Teflon being everywhere might have a downside, well, give yourself a star. Because the gases that we use to make Teflon, PFOA, have been found contaminating everybody and everything. We now estimate that nearly every human on the planet has some of this stuff inside of them, even babies in the womb. And we're finding it in food chains, we're finding it in animals and in plants. We know that this can cause some cancers. What other effects it might have are still being discovered.
That's how we are as humans. We're curious and we're inventors, but until we thoroughly understand applications and inventions or discoveries, I think we should be more conscious and hesitant.
So on balance, how do we judge Plunkett's discovery? In one sense, we don't know the full effects of Teflon on our health and on the environment. But in another sense, we certainly know that it's led to all sorts of incredible inventions that have really improved our quality of life. For myself, I'm glad I don't have to spend my evening scrubbing pans.
Coming up, the woman who invented the future.
We wouldn't have Bluetooth, driverless cars, cell phones, or GPS.
But first,
Chinese monks discovered gunpowder while looking for the elixir of life. So somehow, while looking for the secret of eternal life, they actually found out how to kill a lot of people.
gunpowder is first used in fireworks, but it's quickly adapted for rifles, cannons, grenades, and now forms the basis of almost every new military weapon to date.
Before the arrival of gunpowder, people could hide behind castle walls and just ignore the enemy outside. But with gunpowder, the castle walls came tumbling down. The only problem was it left an awful lot of smoke on the battlefield.
It's the 1800s, and something's about to be discovered that will blow gunpowder out of the water. Dynamite. Our story begins in 1833 with the birth of the founder of the Nobel Prize, Alfred Nobel. Alfred is born into a family of engineers, inventors, and scientists.
Alfred grew up in quite a dynamic family. His father was the chief inventor, and they had a factory in Russia where they made mines for the military.
Alfred and his brothers were schooled like crazy from an early age. Each of them learned 5 languages: English, German, French, Swedish, and Russian. Soon, Alfred is jet-setting across the globe, and he's getting a world-class education from the brightest and the best, wherever they may be.
Well, maybe not jet-setting. This is the 1800s after all.
So meanwhile, around this time, down at the University of Turin, a certain Professor Assanio Sobrero is carrying out some interesting experiments. He adds glycerol to a mixture of nitric and sulfuric acid, and the result is boom!
He's invented nitroglycerine. It's an oily substance that's more explosive than gunpowder. Bearing in mind, gunpowder has been used for hundreds of years. It's just an amazing discovery.
Explosions happen when a huge amount of energy is being released in a short space of time. But exactly how that happens differs depending on the type of explosive.
Gunpowder is what's known as a low explosive. It relies on combustion to generate a quick release of energy.
Have you ever tried to smother out a firework? Yeah, you can't, and that's because the oxygen is already inside that gunpowder.
The carbon and the sulfur inside of the powder takes up the oxygen and converts it to gases.
The pressure that creates and the heat gives you that lovely combustive quality.
Nitroglycerin, on the other hand, is a high explosive. When those molecules break apart in that nitroglycerin and convert to gases, those gases take up 1,200 times the volume of the liquids. So there's a rapid increase in pressure, and that's what creates the explosion. The problem with nitroglycerin is that it only takes a small knock to set it off. So Sanyo Sobrero had to spend a lot of time being very careful. But unfortunately for him, he wasn't quite careful enough.
Sanyo suffers lifelong scars from the accident. He's terrified of what he's created and tries to keep it a secret.
Alfred Nobel must have had his ear to the ground because he soon gets wind of nitroglycerin.
Alfred learns of it when his old chemistry tutor comes over to him and his dad's house, puts a small drop of it on a table, and hits it with a hammer. Alfred and his dad are inspired.
As we know, the chemical is pretty unstable. Alfred sets a mission to himself. He wants to contain the substance, so he and his father start to conduct experiments.
But as Sanyo Sobrero's learned, nitroglycerine is so unstable that even the slightest jolt or friction can cause it to detonate.
Ultimately, there's a major disaster. An explosion at Alfred's dad's factory kills several workers and his younger brother.
After the death of his brother, there's an obituary that appears in a newspaper of Alfred, mistakenly. Now, the obituary says that the master of death is dead. Alfred reads this and thinks, oh my God, this is how I'm going to be remembered. And he resolves then to become a man of peace and not a man of war.
Despite all this, Alfred goes on to manufacture and sell nitroglycerin on an industrial scale, while at the same time he's looking for a way to make it safer to handle. But something strange begins to happen.
Nitroglycerin has some really weird effects on Nobel's factory workers. So the ones who were really healthy complained of headaches during the week that then disappeared when they were off work at the weekends. The ones who had heart problems, however, said that their condition actually got better during the week when they were at work and then got worse again at the weekend.
It turns out the nitric oxide in nitroglycerin is a powerful vasodilator, which helps anyone with high blood pressure.
The veins around the heart dilate, which makes blood flow a lot easier.
However, if you're healthy, that's going to give you a splitting headache. So local physicians thought they'd found a wonder cure for these medical problems and were prescribing nitroglycerin-based products, but they had absolutely no idea how it was working.
By now, nitroglycerin is being mass-produced and sold. The trouble is, it's still highly unstable, and there are more and more accidental explosions.
Alfred reckons that if he mixes the nitroglycerin with another substance, perhaps he can make it safer to handle and more stable. So he tries charcoal.
Sawdust?
He tries cement.
Nothing he tries works. Then one day, when Alfred's at the factory, there's a terrifying accident.
Inside of a crate, a container of nitroglycerin has leaked out. This looks like an incredibly dangerous situation.
If I'd been Alfred Nobel, I'd have been absolutely terrified.
But he discovers that he can handle that crate and it does not explode.
This man clearly has nerves of steel. But why is this nitroglycerin suddenly safe to handle?
Alfred recognized that what looked like a disaster now has turned into an opportunity. This factory was different from his other factories because the other factories used sawdust to contain the packages, sort of the way that we use bubble wrap in packaging today. But this factory used a white clay-like substance instead, and it was many times more absorbent than the other materials that were used.
That earth used for packaging is rich in white peat.
Of all the materials that could have been used, this turns out to be fantastic. It's highly absorbent, it's much better than sawdust.
But even better than that,
it won't explode unless it's ignited by a charge.
So Noble has chanced upon an ideal solution to the problem.
So Mr. Nerves of Steel is excited. He might have finally found the right ingredient to make his explosives safe.
So Alfred starts to experiment to make this an actual practical product that can be used.
I mean, this is exactly what Alfred Nobel has been looking for, a safe way to handle nitroglycerin by mixing it with this local white peat. It's safe to handle and it explodes when you want it to.
He gets the white peat, dips it in nitroglycerine, and then wraps it in paper. Dynamite.
This new explosive changes America almost overnight.
So the Industrial Revolution is full steam ahead at this time. And what it needs is minerals. It needs coal, it needs iron. And that has to be extracted from the earth. And it's thanks to Alfred Nobel that it's a lot easier to get to those precious minerals.
Dynamite is a catalyst for incredible change. America is able to blast through rock more efficiently, and the mining industry explodes, extracting minerals and metals like copper, coal and iron 100 times faster than before.
Minerals, of course, are used everywhere in our modern-day lives, from our telephones to toothpaste, even talcum powder.
Every day in the United States, 35 million paper clips are purchased and 4 million light bulbs, all made of minerals.
Speaking of light bulbs, thanks to dynamite, we've been able to mine all the copper that's needed to lay the thousands of miles of electrical cable in all our homes. And without dynamite, the Hoover Dam wouldn't have been built, helping to create the electricity to power those light bulbs, TVs, and everything else.
The Hoover Dam has 17 electric generators, each one able to supply energy to 100,000 homes. At the time it was built, the Hoover Dam was the largest dam in the world. It's 726 feet high. For perspective, that's taller than the Washington Monument in DC. And there is enough concrete in the Hoover Dam to build a 4-foot wide sidewalk around the entire Earth at its widest point.
That's huge.
It certainly is. By 1890, America is the world's most productive economy, producing twice as much as its closest competitor, Britain. So, thanks to a carelessly handled shipping crate, Alfred Nobel invented a new type of explosive that changed the world and helped America to become a superpower. Every time you use GPS in the car, every time you use your internet on the go.
Sorry, what?
I was just saying that every time you pair with a Bluetooth speaker, you're using a technology accidentally invented by one of the most famous stars of Hollywood's golden age.
Yes, you've seen her before, but somehow we didn't think you'd mind another look at Hedy Lamarr.
This story is a little bit different. There's no accidental spillages or knocks. This is about serendipity and an awesome female inventor.
It's the 1930s, and we're in Austria.
We're now recovering from World War I, we're in the Great Depression. There's quite a lot of political tension in Europe. Hitler gains power. He's gaining a lot of a following. And despite all this political tension that's happening around the world, there's this blossoming actress and engineer named Hedy Lamarr.
She's bold, she's brave, and she's brilliant. In fact, it's rumored that at the age of 5, she took apart a mechanical toy and then put it all back together.
That's amazing.
She's appeared in a lot of European films, and with that, she gets a lot of admirers.
And eventually, she catches the attention of one of the richest men in Europe, an Austrian named Mandel.
Mandel succeeds in charming Lamarr, and they get married in 1933. But this isn't the case of happily ever after.
Her husband is a controlling, jealous maniac. He stops her from acting, and he forces her to become a housewife. What she does with her time instead is host dinner parties for him and his business friends.
And she ends up really just being under kind of like a house arrest.
If you're thinking that Mandel sounds like a nasty bit of work, then you'd be right.
Mandel has the nickname the Merchant of Death. He's an arms dealer. He has ties to Hitler and Mussolini.
Hedy is able to listen in on some of the most important conversations about weapons. They all happen in her house, and because she's a woman and married to Mandel, they speak freely.
Then one day, Lamarr makes her great escape. She comes up with a cunning plan that would finally grant her freedom from her abusive marriage.
She slips the maid some sleeping pills, slips out the servant's entrance with nothing but the clothes on her back and some money and small jewels that she can stuff in a small purse.
She gets out of Austria, makes her way to Paris, and eventually to London, and she's free.
From there, Lamarr makes her way across to America, where she uses her charm and determination to strike a lucrative deal with MGM Studios.
She rises to stardom. She co-stars with Judy Garland. She has 2 Oscar-nominated films.
But Hedy Lamarr has more than just one incredible talent.
Hedy was not just a brilliant actress, she's an engineer at heart.
She's carrying out experiments, even in her trailer when she's offset during the shooting of movies. Hedy loves solving problems, so she starts inventing all sorts of things. She invents a new traffic control system for traffic lights, a glow-in-the-dark dog collar.
She even comes up with a way to improve aeroplanes, making them more aerodynamic and therefore faster.
Let's keep in mind, she's never earned a degree in engineering. She hasn't learned or been technically trained in these aspects of physics, and yet she has transformed so much of our technology.
Hedy's inventions don't stop there.
Germany invades Poland and Warsaw is bombed.
Not long after World War II breaks out, she comes up with a design that she hopes could help defeat Hitler. The Nazis have a chokehold around Europe, and things aren't looking good for the Allies.
Being a beautiful film star, she's rolled out into fundraising.
Hundreds of millions of dollars of war bonds have been sold as a result of the personal appeals of America's most appealing personalities.
And she actually raises $25 million. In today's dollars, that's $380 million. But for her, that's not enough. That's not really what she wants to do. She wants to do more.
Hedy wants to use her brains, not her beauty. She's determined to invent something that will undermine the Nazi U-boat tactical advantage.
Hitler's U-boats strike desperately, sinking 6 ships in 1 week. These 2 seamen were wounded. 46 shipmates lost their lives.
Now at the start of World War II, German U-boats are wreaking havoc. They're operating with near impunity, and they are ruthless.
They're not only taking down boats that are coming in with supplies going into the UK, but they're also taking down boats of Jewish refugees trying to escape and get to safety.
When Hedy was married to Mandel, she had been at the table when top Nazis were talking about how these U-boats defend themselves against threats.
One thing she remembers specifically is how torpedoes work.
Part of the reason that German U-boats are so successful is because they have the technology to jam the signal of oncoming torpedoes, which are controlled using radio waves.
Because if you know the frequency, you can dial in on that frequency, identify what it is, and then block it.
thanks to an unexpected source of inspiration, Hedy comes up with a brilliant idea of countering this. And it all starts when she meets a composer at a Hollywood party.
Hedy meets a guy named George. George has composed a song that requires 16 pianos playing simultaneously. To people at the time, it looks like magic, but actually, his system is quite simple.
George's Ballet Mécanique has 16 player pianos, synchronized so they all play together.
The piano roll has holes in it. These holes tell the piano when to play each note. The piano is able to play the music without any human interaction.
Hedy is inspired by this, wondering if a similar technology could be used to prevent Nazi torpedo jamming. But rather than the tune switching between the pianos, it would be the signal that's jumping between radio frequencies.
Hedy and George work together and they design a system that uses 88 frequencies, which happens to be the number of notes on a piano.
And with these 88 frequencies, they would do something known as frequency hopping. So you would go from one frequency to another without it getting interrupted. And this was a great technique because there's a higher probability of, well, not being detected.
This would allow a high-altitude observation plane to steer the radio-controlled torpedoes without interference. Hedy and George offer their new invention to the US military, who promptly turn it down.
What a bunch of idiots.
Hedy said that her beauty was her curse because the American military did not take her seriously and they did not pick up her invention. Luckily, they found another way to defeat the German U-boats.
But Hedy isn't done yet. Fast forward to 1962. The Cold War is reaching its climax.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. Unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on the island of Cuba.
The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest human beings have ever come to all-out nuclear war between two powerful nuclear-powered nations. We were on the brink.
Cuba allows the Soviets to build a military base on their island, putting nuclear missiles within range of mainland America.
Ships and aircraft of all services kept watch over thousands of square miles of ocean. All sightings were relayed swiftly to Sinkland at Norfolk.
And so what JFK initiates with the US Navy is basically putting kind of like a barrier so that no other Russian ships or submarines can come in to bring in more missiles.
Unbeknown to Lamarr, these ships are secretly using her invention.
The American submarines that participated in a naval blockade used Hedy's technology in order to have secret communications that could not be spied upon, and also they use it exactly like Hedy had recommended. Their torpedoes use this frequency hopping technique in order so that they could not be blocked. So the Russians knew this and the blockade worked.
1 week later, Premier Khrushchev issued a new order calling for the return of the weapons to Russia.
In a way, her inventions helped end the Cold War.
Finally, Hedy's invention was being put to use.
Without credit to her, without paying her, and without her even knowing.
What happens next is so far removed from Hedy's original idea that it's inconceivable anyone could have foreseen it. It's 1971, and we're in Hawaii. A team of computer scientists are on the verge of changing the world as we know it.
The University of Hawaii is working on a system to connect multiple computers together simultaneously, but without using cables. They get a system together where they can connect 7 computers using a high-frequency radio signal.
However, they're only able to send one message at a time.
Enter again Hedy Lamarr's frequency hopping invention.
Using Hedy's technology, multiple computers can now communicate with each other at the same time. This was the first wireless network, or as we call it, Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi has completely changed our world. Products in our homes are connected by Wi-Fi.
Walking through an airport and being able to check emails, or let's admit it, maybe checking the amount of likes we got on our most recent post on Instagram or Twitter. Wi-Fi has completely innovated and disrupted humanity.
For all I know, you might be watching me right now on a Wi-Fi connected device. Lucky you.
The freedom it's afforded us is immense, and it's completely changed how people communicate, interact, socialize, and form relationships.
About 40% of Americans have met their partner through the internet. That first message was probably thanks to a Wi-Fi signal.
Wi-Fi has even changed how we work. We don't even have to go to work. We can work from our couch, from our bedroom, from the beach, from the garden, or even while sitting on a train riding across the country.
Frequency hopping is instrumental not just in Wi-Fi, but also in a whole host of modern technology.
We wouldn't have Bluetooth, driverless cars, cell phones, or GPS.
It's completely transformed so many other aspects of our lives.
From smartphones to smart homes, digital assistants to streaming services. Hedy Lamarr could never have realized it at the time, but her invention designed to beat Hitler helped to save us from nuclear disaster and then took over the world.
We really should be thanking this woman who just completely transformed everything. Hedy Lamarr is a name that I hope everybody is now going to remember.